Coming up on this edition of ARIRANG News, after two failed nominations, President Park Geun-hye has decided to retain Prime Minister Chung Hong-won, who had planned to resign over the April ferry disaster. South and North Korea resumed their quarterly Kaesong Park meeting after a 6-month hiatus, but see no agreement at the end. Corporate Korea's profitability inches up in the first quarter of this year. Second quarter earnings, however, may still take a hit due to the April ferry disaster. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kang Tae-ri in Seoul. North Korea has fired 3 short-range missiles into the East Sea on this Thursday afternoon. This, according to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff. An official was quoted by Yonhap News as saying that they traveled some 190 kilometers and that Seoul is still trying to figure out what kind of missiles they were and why North Korea fired them. This is the 10th round of missile firings by North Korea so far this year. And of course, we will keep you posted on this development as we get more details in the next newscast. Inter-Korean talks on ways to improve the Kaesong industrial complex have taken place for the very first time in 6 months. But as our Hwang Sung-hee reports, the two Koreas seem to have failed in making any concrete progress.
For the first time in 6 months, officials from the two Koreas met on Thursday to discuss matters related to their jointly run Kaesong industrial complex. But the meeting ended without concrete results. Key issues put forth by South Korea included the installment of internet services and the implementation of an electronic entry system to allow South Korean workers to commute freely in and out of the complex. However, North Korea wanted to discuss matters related to the wages of North Korean workers. South Korea proposed to hold their next meeting in August, but the North did not give a clear answer. The quarterly meeting of the Joint Committee of the Business Park has been at a standstill since December last year, when inter-Korean relations soured following military drills between Seoul and Washington. With some 50,000 North Koreans working for more than 120 South Korean factories, the Kaesong complex is seen as the last remaining symbol of inter-Korean cooperation. Last year, the factory zone sat idle for 5 months after North Korea unilaterally closed it down amid escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula. Some had taken Thursday's talks as a sign of thawing inter-Korean ties, but it seems conditions on the peninsula will remain icy for now. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
And North Korea and Japan are set to hold another round of talks next week to work out the details of an agreement reached late last month. Japanese Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida said Wednesday that the two sides will sit down on next Tuesday in Beijing, where North Korean officials will explain how a special committee plans to reinvestigate the abductions of Japanese nationals in the 70s and 80s. Under the terms of this agreement, Japan is to ease certain sanctions on North Korea in return for resuming the probe. President Park Geun-hye has decided to retain her current prime minister after 2 failed nominations. The move is widely viewed as a Hail Mary pass by the president to avoid further setbacks to her administrations. Choi Yoo-sun has the detail.
In a surprise announcement on Thursday, the presidential office said President Park had rejected Prime Minister Chung Hong-won's previous offer to resign and asked him to continue working for the nation with a sense of duty. Prime Minister Chung had expressed a wish to step down in the wake of the Sewol-ho ferry accident 2 months ago. It is the first time in Korea's constitutional history that a prime minister will be staying on after rendering a resignation. The presidential press secretary said President Park, who has promised a massive restructuring of the government and a bolstering of the national safety system following April's ferry tragedy, went through great pains before making the latest decision.
The administrative vacuum and division of public opinion intensified due to the previous nominations. The president has decided the situation can no longer be left alone.
In regards to the presidential office's personnel verification system, which has been heavily criticized after the recent back-to-back nominee withdrawals, a new senior secretary will be put in charge of finding people to fill positions and verifying their credentials. Upon Thursday's announcement, the Prime Minister vowed to pour all his energy into correcting irregularities in Korean society and making the country a safer place to live. He also said when necessary, he would not hesitate to offer his views to the president on state matters. The ruling party said the president's decision was understandable and that she had put a priority on minimizing the administrative vacuum and moving forward with the running of state affairs. The main opposition, on the other hand, criticized the administration for failing to meet the people's expectations to reform Korean society in the aftermath of the ferry disaster. Choi Yu-sun, ARIRANG News.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. Corporate Korea's profitability saw a slight improvement in the first quarter of this year thanks to strong exports, but the second quarter is expected to suffer due to the impact of the April ferry disaster. Hwang Ji explains.
In the first 3 months of this year, Korean companies seem to be weathering economic uncertainties at home and abroad rather well, reflecting the nation's moderate recovery track during the period. Korea's central bank says that corporate profitability improved in the first quarter of this year from a year earlier, with profit margins reaching 5.2% in the January to March period, up from 4.8%. That means companies are now getting 52 cents in profit out of every $100 in sales, whereas they earned 48 cents in the previous year. Profit margin improved across all industries, save for the shipbuilding sector, with the electronics and automobile sectors leading the gain. The central bank says, however, that the upbeat trend might not continue on through the second quarter. That is because of the ferry disaster in April that resulted in the further denting of already sluggish private spending. For a glimpse at the pace of recovery in the second quarter of this year, pundits are waiting for May figures, which will give a better indication of whether the impact of the disaster is temporary or more long-term. Hwang Ji, ARIRANG News.
The finance minister nominee in Korea has a tough task ahead of him, especially when it comes to containing high household debt in the country. And it gets even tougher when it's promising ways to ease household loan regulations. Connie Kim tells us more.
Korea's household debt has grown so much that it's threatening to hurt the future growth of the economy. And that's the warning by a major government think tank. Korea's household debt topped $1 trillion last year, which is 85.6% of the country's GDP. Now that's beyond the 85% threshold where the think tank says consumers start cutting back on spending, which could spell problems for the incoming economic policy chief. Finance Minister-designate Choi Kyung-hwan wants to encourage households to borrow more to buy homes and other real estate as a means of spurring economic activity.
If regulators lower bars for lending, it will revitalize the housing and construction sector in the short term. However, in the long term, the overall economy is expected to become vulnerable. In that sense, second thoughts must be given before they start easing limits for housing loans for the sake of short-term benefits.
Credit rating agency Fitch has also echoed the warning, saying easing regulations on home purchases could aggravate the already serious household debt problem. The agency underscored household debt as a risk factor that could threaten the country's sovereign position. Korea's household debt to disposable income reached its highest level ever at 163% last year, higher than other advanced economies such as the United Kingdom at 152% and the United States at 111%. With household debt reaching dangerously high levels in Korea, the incoming finance minister has a tough job on his hands. He'll be tasked with bringing mounting debt levels under control while also boosting domestic consumption. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Korean women are becoming more active in the workplace. A new study shows that the South Korea's female economic participation rate reached its highest level in 7 years in 2013. But as our Kwon So-wha reports, that's not necessarily a reason to celebrate.
More and more Korean women are working, as a recently conducted study revealed on Thursday that 50.2% of women participated in the nation's economy last year, which is the highest rate in 7 years. The research also shows that they prefer working rather than staying at home, changing diapers and cooking. Women power in Korea is also being highlighted in the female population rate, which reached exactly 50% this year, a first since 1960 when the government began recording the gender population rate. But still, in terms of economic participation, the gap between men and women remains huge, as it stood at 23% last year, meaning changes in the male-dominated society is needed for a well-rounded balance. Child rearing is the #1 reason cited by mothers with or without non-school-aged kids for not working. Social bias is seen as the second biggest obstacle. 7 out of 10 mothers of young kids said they felt stressed at home, and nearly half of them wished for the expansion of private and public daycare centers in the country. One positive aspect, however, is that the perception of only women bearing the responsibility of taking care of children is beginning to change slowly, as the number of men taking paternity leave has more than doubled compared to 10 years ago, standing at 3.3% in 2013. Statistics suggest that next year, the population of women in the country will surpass that of men, putting an even brighter spotlight on the need to level the playing field in the workplace. 권소아, 아리랑 뉴스.
Two weeks have already passed since the 2014 World Cup kicked off in Brazil, and only half the teams can remain to play on at this point. We often see football superstars struggle at the World Cup, either because their national team don't have the skills to back them up or they just get stage fright. This year, though, we're seeing one footballer cement himself as a legend of the game. Now, who else could we be talking about but Lionel Messi? The pin-side striker scored a great goal after just 3 minutes against Nigeria to give Argentina an early 1-0 lead. But Nigeria's Ahmed Musa equalized just a minute after, cutting the Argentinian fan celebration short. Both strikers added another, but Argentina takes this one as Rojo sealed 3-2 victory with a goal in the second half. Scoring in all 3 group matches, Messi now shares the top scorer spot with Brazil's Neymar with 4 goals from 3 matches. Despite the loss, Nigeria advances to the next round as Iran lost 3-1 to Bosnia-Herzegovina. France drew 0-0 against Ecuador, clinching the next round with their European neighbor, Switzerland. Now only 4 spots remain in the last 16. These spots will be filled by the end of this evening in Brazil, kicking off with Group G at 1 p.m. local time. With Germany and the US leading the group with 4 points each, they can both move on to the next round by just drawing the match. But Portugal will be hoping that they don't, so they can seek the next knockout stage with a strong win against Ghana. Korean football fans will once again gather on the streets to cheer on the squad for Korea's last group match at 5 a.m. on a Friday morning, Seoul time. With Belgium already in the final 16, the window is open for 3 countries in Group H. So what do Korea need to do? They need a comprehensive victory against Belgium and for Russia to beat or draw against Algeria, so it's going to be very, very tough. But head coach Hong Myung-bo is unlikely to make many changes to the team that lost to Algeria earlier. He told reporters that he will most likely select under-fire striker Park Geun-hye, who has been struggling in Brazil in the first 11. The phrase he repeated over and over was that his players would do their best. But on the other hand, the Belgian coach is resting his star men since they're already through. Let's hear what the players have to say.
We have one last group match. That's all we are thinking about. We are trying our best to give it all that we can without too much pressure.
We're winning our matches, but we aren't yet at 100%. That will come with time. We'll play better, gain confidence, and win matches in style.
Well, we'll see which of these players step off the pitch at Arena Corinthians in Sao Paulo in the early hours of Friday morning Korea time with a big smile on their faces. Let's hope it's Korea. And that was your look at today's World Cup actions, and I'll see you back here with more from Brazil 2014.
Senior military and government officials in Iraq have confirmed that Syria carried out airstrikes against Islamic militants across the Iraqi border. For more on this story, Paul E. is joining us from the News Center. Paul, these reported airstrikes show that Damascus is taking this military threat very seriously, but at the same time, it's also raising questions on how this rising insurgency is being funded.
That's right. Many, especially in the Iraqi government, have been shocked at the rapid speed at which these Sunni insurgents have captured most of northwestern Iraq. They've been mostly led by the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, which is considered the richest jihadi organization. According to analysts, ISIL gets most of its money from controlling energy fields and secret foreign donors who support the group's goal of building an Islamic State from the Mediterranean Sea to Iran. They've also been known to extort money from businesses in Iraq and even from members of the Iraqi army. After taking over the country's second largest city of Mosul, ISIL reportedly stole an estimated $500 million from the central bank. Experts say disrupting this financing will go a long way towards preventing the rebel advance.
In a war, being able to fund yourself is a critical part of being able to survive. ISIL's funding definitely helps it establish itself and gain more territory. It helps it buy loyalties. It helps it pay various government workers to ensure that they show up. It helps it bribe other groups so that they pledge allegiance to it.
U.S. and Iraqi senior military officials confirmed Syrian warplanes had launched airstrikes in Iraq this week against ISIL militants who had recently joined forces with al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria at the country's border. While Iraq did not request the raid, Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki said he welcomed any such strike against the militants.
And now turning to the crisis in Ukraine, Paul, Western countries are warning of more sanctions against Russia unless Moscow acts quickly to further de-escalate tensions in eastern Ukraine. What are some of the steps that Russia can take at this point?
While following a meeting of NATO foreign ministers, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to publicly call on separatists in Ukraine to lay down their arms. While applauding Putin's request to cancel a law that would have cleared him to launch a military intervention in Ukraine, Kerry said that could be, quote, reversed in 10 minutes. Meanwhile, the residents in the eastern Ukrainian city of Slavyansk are recovering amid a tense ceasefire between pro-Russian separatists and government forces.
The rebels were first shooting from up here. Then Ukrainian troops started shooting from the TV tower, and one shell hit here in the middle of the street and another in our yard. It was a lot of shrapnel that wounded my wife.
Moscow denies Western accusations that it has allowed rebel fighters to cross into Ukraine along with heavy weapons, and that it's keeping its own troops close to the border to put pressure on Kiev. The United Nations said last week that nearly 260 civilians have been killed since mid-April, but that figure is likely to be higher as international monitors have been blocked off from many areas.
And Paul, it's been nearly 4 months since Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 vanished from radar screens, prompting a massive international search, of course, for this plane and its passengers. And it looks like there's been a new development in this search.
That's right, Charity. Australian authorities says the hunt for that missing Malaysian airliner will shift even further south in the Indian Ocean. It ushers in another new phase of the long, costly, and so far fruitless search. Officials said the new priority area will be still focused in the same arc in the southern Indian Ocean, where the aircraft is believed to have made its final journey. The 60,000 square kilometer area has already been subject to aerial and visual searches for debris, but is set to go underwater. Australian Deputy Prime Minister Warren Truss said investigators identified the area after another review of satellite data.
That this area has never been comprehensively mapped previously, and so to put new equipment down into that area without having a clear knowledge of what the seafloor is like certainly risks the operation and the capacity of that equipment to operate safely.
The next phase of the search mission is expected to start in August and take almost a year. The Boeing 777 carrying 239 passengers and crew disappeared on March 8th while en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing.
And finally, Google has kicked off its annual developers conference in San Francisco, California. What are some of the big announcements this year? It's all about connectivity these days, right?
Yeah, that's right. Google says it wants to be involved in all parts of your life as it attempts to rapidly extend its business into the growing field of internet-connected devices. At a special keynote address on Wednesday, Google announced new software platforms that it hopes will take root in TVs, cars, and watches, and even hinted at creating its own smartphone for emerging markets. The first cars running the so-called Android Auto software for navigation, music, and messaging will hit showrooms later this year.
We're right at the beginning in a new phase in the miniaturization of technology, which means that it's finally possible to make a powerful computer small enough to wear comfortably on your body all day long. And there's a huge opportunity to bring rich user experiences to these devices. And that's why we're building Android Wear as our platform for wearables based on Android.
The other main focus for the international conference was hardware. Tech giants including Samsung, LG, and even Motorola officially unveiled their first smartwatches that run on Google's Android Wear. All three companies are hoping to have the breakout product that launches smart wearable devices from its current niche market into a must-have accessory for the digital age. Chetty?
All right, Paul, good stuff as always. Thank you very much, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. Now let's check on weather conditions with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. So Bo-kyung, an ozone warning was issued for some parts of Seoul as well as some nearby areas, right?
Yeah, that's right. But that has been lifted for Seoul, but remains in effect for parts of Gyeonggi-do province. Well, at the moment, Jeju is under the influence of monsoonal front, which will drop 5 to 10 millimeters of precipitation through tomorrow. However, it looks to be different for the inland regions as we're looking at another day, a typical hot summer day with high UV levels. So don't forget to apply the sunscreen before heading outdoors. Moving on to Friday's readings, Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju make it to the low 30s, Busan to 26. On to other places, Jeju reaches 24, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang hit 22 and 25. And last but not least, on Friday, 5 a.m. Korea time, Team Korea will face its final group match against Belgium in Sao Paulo. It's shaping up to be a misty day there, and numbers should drop to the low 20s by the time the game begins. That'll do it for now, but I'll be back with more after 10.
All right, thank you very much, Bo-kyung. And that wraps up this edition of ARIRANG News at 8. Thanks for watching.